I remember the first night like it was yesterday. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I clocked in at 11 p.m., feeling the usual dread that came with being the only one in the office at this hour. The rest of the building had already shut down, except for the few of us left to manage the overnight shift. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that settles in when the air conditioner shuts off and only the sound of your own breath fills the room. I was working the night shift at a small tech company in Chicago. The pay was decent, but there was something about the building that always felt off. It wasn't the old office chairs or the stale coffee in the break room. It was something deeper, something I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe it was the fact that the entire building, including the second-floor offices, was pretty much abandoned after dark. Or perhaps it was the strange noises I heard in the halls late at night. At first, I chalked it up to the building settling or pipes groaning under the weight of the city. But as the weeks passed, I started to question my assumptions. That night, as I sat down at my desk, my manager, David, gave me a pat on the back and said, "It's just us tonight. Keep your head down, don't get involved in anything weird. The less you hear, the better." David wasn't one for jokes. He was dead serious. His pale face seemed to have even less color than usual, and I figured it was just another late-night fatigue thing. But it was after midnight when the strange sounds started. It wasn't just the normal creaks of a building at rest. These were rhythmic, deliberate noises, as if someone was walking up and down the hallway just outside the office door. It wasn't uncommon for the janitorial staff to work late, but there was no sign of anyone. I checked the security cameras, but they were down again. The third time that week. "Must be the wind," I muttered to myself, but even I didn't believe it. The air felt still, the temperature almost unnervingly cold for a late spring night. I tried to shake it off, focusing on my work, but that nagging feeling kept growing stronger. The footsteps, they were getting closer. Every few minutes, they echoed louder down the corridor, almost as if they were circling the hallway outside my office. I peeked out the window, scanning the shadows in the hall. Nothing. Not even the usual flicker of the lights that sometimes happened in the old building. The hallway was empty. But then, the door to the stairwell, which I knew for sure was locked, creaked open. I froze. That was impossible. The only key to that door was with David, and he had been nowhere near it. I grabbed my phone, thinking I'd call him to ask what the hell was going on. But before I could dial, I heard it, a faint whisper from the stairwell. "You're not supposed to be here." I almost dropped my phone. My heart started pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I quickly switched off the screen, not wanting to make a sound. Every muscle in my body was frozen, but my mind was racing. I told myself I must be hearing things. I hadn't slept properly in days. Maybe the stress of the job was finally getting to me, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The whisper from the stairwell was too clear to be my imagination. It was soft, almost guttural, like it was trying to keep its voice from being heard by someone else. I hesitated, but curiosity, or perhaps pure fear, drove me to stand up. Slowly, I walked toward the door to the stairwell. My footsteps sounded too loud in the stillness, like they were echoing off the walls. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. When I reached the door, I placed my hand on the cold metal handle and stopped. The whispers came again, this time closer, almost as if the voice had moved into the stairwell itself. "You're not supposed to be here." I took a deep breath and opened the door, half expecting to see David standing there, trying to prank me. But it was empty. The stairwell stretched downward into darkness, the dim emergency lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick, damp with the smell of mildew. I took a few steps in, squinting into the void below. There was no sound, no sign of life, just the oppressive quiet. The temperature dropped even further as I descended one step at a time, my footfalls muffled by the thick carpet in the stairwell. And then I saw it, a shadow. It wasn't the shape of a person, but something larger. It moved quickly, darting across the bottom of the stairwell. A figure, no, not a figure, something else, seemed to vanish just as quickly as it appeared. I froze. My blood ran cold. I was about to turn around and head back up when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a growl. Low, guttural, and unnatural. Leave now. I don't remember how fast I ran back to the office, but I was practically shaking when I got there. The door slammed behind me, and I locked it. I checked the cameras again, still down. I couldn't stop myself from looking over my shoulder, expecting something to be right there, standing just beyond my sight. Then I noticed something else. On my desk, where I had left my coffee mug earlier, there was a small note, handwritten, the ink smudged, as if it had been hastily scribbled. "You're not the first one to hear it." My stomach dropped. I knew I wasn't just imagining things. I wasn't alone. The note sat there, like a weight on my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, but the more I thought about it, the more my fear deepened. I was alone in the office. No one else was scheduled for the night shift, and the building was silent aside from the occasional creaks and groans of the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't just the eerie whispers or the growl from the stairwell. It was as if the very air around me had changed. My skin felt tight, my breath shallow. The room felt wrong. I picked up the note, trying to steady my hands. The handwriting was messy, hurried, but that wasn't what unsettled me. It was the fact that I hadn't left that note there. No one else had access to my desk. The thought crossed my mind. Could it have been David? But that didn't make sense. David had been gone for hours, and he had no reason to mess with me like this. He had always been straightforward, even a bit too serious. If he had left it, he would have told me in person. A part of me knew I had to get out of the office, but another part of me, fearful and unsure, wanted to stay and finish my shift. I just have to power through. After all, I was probably just imagining things. But then I heard something. It wasn't from the stairwell. It wasn't even a sound at all, not at first. It was more of a feeling, a pressure against the back of my neck, as though someone was standing just behind me, breathing down on me. I spun around in my chair, but there was no one there. The air was thick, and I could feel the room closing in on me. My heartbeat grew louder, more erratic. I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm down. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe a prank. Maybe something mechanical. Maybe I was just losing it. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like being in a room with someone you couldn't see, but you knew was there, and you knew they were waiting for the right moment to make their presence known. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then everything went dark. I froze. The building had power. Hell, it had just been working fine when I checked the breaker earlier. My phone screen was the only light in the room now, casting long, eerie shadows against the walls. I stood up quickly, scanning the room. My breath was ragged now. The stillness was suffocating. I pulled out my phone to call David, but then I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the number. What would I even say? "Hey, I think something's in the building with me?" He'd think I was crazy. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end again. I heard something, a soft tapping, faint but distinct. It was coming from the hallway outside my office, slow and deliberate. One tap, another tap, and then silence. I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to know what was happening. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk drawer and stepped out of the office. My legs felt heavy, as though they were made of lead, but I forced myself to move forward. The light flickered weakly as I shined it down the dark corridor. The walls seemed to stretch longer than I remembered. The tapping had stopped, but I knew something was wrong. As I walked toward the end of the hallway, the temperature dropped again, almost freezing. My breath came out in clouds, like it was midwinter, but the building's heat was still on. The lights in the hallway were off, and the flickering emergency lights seemed to distort the space, making it feel even more claustrophobic. And then I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hallway. A tall, lanky figure, barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't make out any details at first. It was almost as if the figure itself was made of shadows, distorted, like it didn't belong in this world. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My body was paralyzed with fear. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching me. And then, with a voice that wasn't a whisper but a clear, cold command, it said, "You shouldn't be here." The words cut through me like ice. You shouldn't be here. I couldn't move. My legs refused to work. My body frozen in place as my heart thudded painfully in my chest. The figure in the hallway didn't approach me. It just stood there, an unsettling shape in the darkness. The air around me felt thick, oppressive, like I was drowning in it. My breath hitched, but I somehow managed to take a step back. One step, then another, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body felt as though it was made of stone. I should have bolted right then, but there was something about the figure that held me captive. Something about the way it was watching me, like it knew everything about me, knew things I didn't even know. I turned quickly, hoping to escape back into my office. But as I did, the lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off. Darkness closed in on me, and I could no longer see the figure. It was as though it had disappeared into the shadows, but I knew it was still there. I could feel it. My flashlight, weak and trembling in my hands, flickered in and out. Every time it went dark, I could feel the pressure growing around me, like something was just behind me, breathing down my neck. Don't look behind you. Don't look behind you. I kept telling myself that over and over, but the compulsion to turn around was too strong. And when I finally did, there it was. The figure was closer, much closer, standing just a few feet away from me. Its shadowy form still barely discernible, but now unmistakably present. His face, I couldn't see its face. The darkness around it was like a wall that absorbed all light and detail. Suddenly, the air grew colder still. I could see my breath now, thick puffs of it hanging in the frigid air. The figure didn't speak this time, but I could hear something. A soft clicking sound, like bones grinding against one another. And then the unmistakable sensation of being followed. I sprinted. My feet slammed against the floor, the sound deafening in the silence. I didn't dare look behind me. I just ran down the hallway, past the break room, past the elevator that was already out of service at this hour. I ran straight toward the emergency exit at the back of the building. But as I reached the door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Cold, impossibly cold. I spun around, my flashlight aimed at the spot where the hand had touched me, but no one was there. I was alone, or so I thought. The whisper came again, but this time, it was directly in my ear. You can't leave. I whipped around, panic seizing my body, but the hallway was empty again. Couldn't breathe. I was trapped. I could feel it closing in on me. The dark presence. There was nowhere left to run. The walls of the hallway seemed to stretch further, bending unnaturally, and I realized I wasn't in the same building anymore. It was like a warped version of The Office, a twisted reflection where reality had become an abstract nightmare. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the floors groaned under my feet. That's when I saw it, the door. It was a door I had never noticed before, nestled at the far end of the hallway. Its frame was old, the wood splintering and warped, but there was something about it, something pulling me toward it, a feeling of inevitability that I couldn't ignore. I walked toward it, my every step slow and deliberate. The presence that had been following me had disappeared, but I could feel its gaze, watching me from the shadows. When I reached the door, my hand trembling, I turned the handle. The door creaked open, and I stepped through. The moment I did, everything went silent. The strange, distorted hallway disappeared behind me, and I found myself standing in an old, dimly lit room, an old storage room. I wasn't alone. The figure was there, standing in the corner. It wasn't in the hallway anymore. It had followed me into this room, and this time I saw it clearly. It was a tall, gaunt thing, its body unnaturally thin, with long, twisted limbs. Its face was a blank, featureless void, a patch of darkness that seemed to absorb everything around it. The shadow of the figure stretched unnaturally across the room, twisting like a living thing. And then, in a voice that was neither whisper nor growl, it said, "You were warned. I didn't think. Couldn't. I just ran." My legs moved on their own, my heart hammering in my chest like a war drum. The figure, thing, was still standing in the corner, watching me with its featureless face. I could feel the weight of its gaze, cold and suffocating, as if it were pulling the life out of me with every passing second. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I swear I could hear the sound of it moving, just behind me. Its steps, slow and deliberate, matching my own frantic pace. It wasn't chasing me the way I expected something to. No, it was following me, patiently, always just one step behind, never quite close enough to catch, but always present. I burst through the storage room door and back into the hall. The office I had entered earlier. David's desk, the empty rooms, the flickering lights, was gone. It was like I had stepped into some twisted version of the building. The air was thick and damp, the walls closing in. The once familiar, mundane hallway had turned into something else. Something alive, breathing, and watching. I didn't know where I was anymore. My eyes darted around, desperate to find anything I recognized. But all I saw were doors that I didn't remember, corridors that stretched too far into the darkness. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of my breathing and the faint, unexplainable hum of something else. Then, in a sharp, unnerving shift, I heard a sound. It was a voice, David's voice. His voice, distant, faint, but unmistakable. "Help me," it said. I froze. My first instinct was to run toward it. I couldn't leave David behind. But as soon as I took a step forward, the whispering started again, louder this time. "Don't listen to it." The voice had changed. It wasn't David anymore. It was something other. Something that sounded like it was trying to sound human, but failed. The words slithered into my ears, like a sickening combination of laughter and despair. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, my mouth dry as dust. I was losing it. I had to stay calm. I had to focus. I turned toward the far wall, where I spotted a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. I couldn't tell if it was the same figure from before or something else, but it didn't matter. The door was my only escape. I had to make it through. I ran toward it, the thudding of my footsteps deafening in the silence. I reached out for the handle, but just as my hand touched it, something slammed into me from behind, knocking me to the floor. The wind was knocked out of me, and I could feel something cold, something unnatural, crawling over my skin. I scrambled to get up, my hands shaking. I didn't dare look behind me. I just grabbed the door handle, threw it open, and ran out into the night. I had no idea where I was anymore. The building was gone. There was nothing but a vast, empty void in front of me. The cold air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I was out. I was free. But then I heard it again. That voice. David's voice. "Why did you leave me?" It wasn't David anymore. It was the thing. The one that had been following me all night. The one that had been whispering in the dark. Its shadow stretching across the walls. Its eyes burning into me. The ground beneath me shifted, and I collapsed to my knees. Something grabbed my wrist, cold fingers like ice. I tried to pull away, but they tightened, pulling me toward the darkness. I was pulled into the void, swallowed whole, and the last thing I heard was the low, guttural growl of the figure in the shadows. I never made it out of that building. The night shift took me just like it had taken others before me. No one ever found my body. No one ever saw me again. But that night, when I was still alive, I knew I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, you won't be either. The feeling never left me. The unease, the paranoia. It was like a shadow that followed me even after I left that cursed building. I wish I could tell you I found peace after escaping, that I moved on and forgot about the things I saw in the darkness. But I didn't. The nightmare didn't end when I walked out that door. The world outside felt wrong. Every corner I turned, I half expected to see that same figure standing there, waiting for me. The shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Every time I passed a darkened doorway or alley, I felt a cold hand brushing against my skin. It was as if the building had followed me, haunted me in ways I couldn't understand. At night, I would wake up to the same whispering voice, the same growl, the same words. "You shouldn't have left." I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. Couldn't outrun it, couldn't hide. It was there in every shadow, in every creak of the floor beneath me. It wanted something. It needed something. And then one night it happened. I was staying at my new apartment, trying to put some distance between myself and the terror of that place. I didn't even want to think about the building anymore. But that night, I heard a knock at my door. A soft, deliberate knock. 3 taps. I didn't answer. I wasn't stupid. I knew what it was. It was the thing. It had found me. I lay there in the darkness, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself it was just a dream. But the knock came again. Louder this time. 3 taps. Knock, knock, knock. The sound reverberated through the apartment, filling my ears with that cold, unnatural noise. I grabbed my phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The power went out. I knew it was here. I pulled the blankets over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, praying it was all just a nightmare. But the pressure in the room grew, heavy and suffocating. I could feel its presence. I could feel it standing at the foot of my bed, watching me, waiting. You shouldn't have left. The voice was clearer now, closer. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. I didn't dare open my eyes. Couldn't. I knew what I'd see. And then I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like nails against wood, coming closer to my bed. I opened my eyes, just for a second. And that was all it took. It was standing there. The thing. That tall, twisted figure. Its face still nothing but a dark void. Its hands reached out to me, long fingers curling into the air like claws. Couldn't scream. My throat was dry. My body wouldn't move. All I could do was stare as it moved closer, its form stretching unnaturally in the dim light. And then, in a voice that was no longer just a whisper, but an overwhelming force, it said, "Time to come back." I tried to push it away, tried to fight, but it was like trying to fight the darkness itself. It dragged me into the shadows, and that's where it ends, or maybe where it begins again. The night shift never truly lets you go, and I might never escape it. I'm not sure how much time has passed since I was dragged into the darkness. Days? Weeks? The passage of time doesn't mean anything anymore. The moment I stepped back into that place, it all became fluid, disjointed, like I was stuck in a nightmare that would never end. When I woke up, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was back at the office. The same cold, empty building. The smell of old carpet and mildew hung in the air. The flickering lights buzzed above me, and the clock on the wall showed the same time it had when I first arrived at the night shift, 11 p.m. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming, but I knew something was different. I could feel it. The air felt thicker, colder, as if the very walls of the building had absorbed the fear that I left behind. It was as if the building itself had become a part of the thing that haunted me, feeding off my terror. I tried to move, to scream, but nothing came out. My body felt heavy, my limbs stiff, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the hallway. The same rhythmic tapping that had haunted me before. But this time there was no mistaking it. It was here. It was watching me. The door to my office opened slowly, and I saw it standing there once again. The figure, its tall, gaunt frame stretched unnaturally in the doorway, its shadow spilling across the floor like a living thing. "You can't leave," it said, its voice a low, hollow growl that seemed to reverberate through the room, shaking the very air. I tried to move again, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own skin. It was like I was reliving the same night over and over, the same cycle of fear and hopelessness. But then something changed. The figure didn't speak this time. It just moved, slowly, deliberately, stepping into the room. Each step echoed, the sound stretching into eternity. The closer it got, the more the room seemed to distort, the walls warping and bending like they were alive. The pressure in the room grew, suffocating, like 1,000 invisible hands were pressing down on me. My lungs burned, but I couldn't breathe. I had to do something. I had to break the cycle. But how? The thing reached out its long, clawed fingers, and for the first time, I saw its face, or rather, what was left of it. The darkness, the absence of anything. It was as if the thing had no face at all, just a void, a black hole that sucked in every bit of light around it. And then, just as it touched me, I understood. This was it. The night shift was not just a place. It was a state, a loop, prison, a dimension where the fear never ended, where those trapped inside were destined to relive the same horrors over and over again. I was never meant to escape. No one was. The thing's grip tightened, pulling me into the shadows once more. I could feel myself slipping away, but before I did, I heard one last thing. Welcome back. And here we are at the end of the road, or perhaps the beginning of the next chapter. The night shift is endless, and it will claim whoever steps into it. I'll never be free, but maybe, just maybe, you might be next. It's hard to explain the feeling of being trapped in an endless loop, where time itself bends and warps like it's not even real. When I say I've been stuck in this nightmare, I mean it literally. The moment I was pulled back into that building, pulled into it, I knew I was no longer in control. I don't even know if this is the same reality I used to know. All I know is that I'm no longer living in the same world. The moment the thing touched me, the darkness pulled me into the shadows. I thought I would be consumed, but I wasn't. I woke up, or at least I thought I did. I was in the break room this time. The stale air was still thick with that odd metallic scent, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. It was like I had woken up at the same time in the same place, but something was off. The room felt wrong. It felt like it was pulling me, calling me back into it, just like the voice had. The cold gnawed at me. The silence was deafening. I stood up and stumbled to the window, looking outside. But the view had changed. The glass was cracked. The world outside was different, distorted. The buildings were leaning in, as if the city was about to collapse on itself. Everything had been twisted, warped, and no matter how hard I blinked or rubbed my eyes, it never cleared. I wasn't in Chicago anymore. I turned to face the hallway. The eerie silence felt heavier now, suffocating me. Every step I took, the echo of my shoes against the floor seemed to stretch on forever. I was walking the same halls, but they weren't the same. They had been altered. It was as if the building had absorbed my fear and turned it into something else. Something alive. I could feel it watching me, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Not in front of me, behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see the figure again. The tall, shadowy presence that had haunted me from the start. But no, the hallway was empty. No one was there. I tried to shake it off, tried to move faster, but my pace quickened involuntarily as I heard the footsteps grow louder, closer. The sound of someone, or something, walking toward me. Thud, thud, thud. I reached for the stairwell door at the end of the hallway, hoping to escape. But just as I grabbed the handle, a cold gust of wind slammed the door shut. It was here. I turned slowly, dread filling my chest as the figure emerged from the shadows. This time, it wasn't just standing there. It was moving toward me, its long arms dragging along the walls as if the very structure of the building couldn't contain its form. Its face, if you could call it a face, was still that featureless void. But now it was more than just a shadow. It was a force, a presence that made the air vibrate. "You can't leave," it said again, its voice resonating deep in my bones. But this time it wasn't just words. There was something deeper to it. The walls around me began to pulse, as if the building itself was alive, breathing, watching, feeding off my fear. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My body was frozen. I was a prisoner again. Then, the air shifted, like something was drawing closer, pulling itself into the space between us. The figure extended one of its long, twisted arms and pointed directly at me. "You're here now, forever." That was when I realized I wasn't just stuck in this building. This place had consumed me. The thing, the figure, the entity, it was never just a shadow. It had been waiting for someone like me, someone who would break under its weight, someone who would become part of it. I could hear voices now, whispers, faint but growing louder, coming from the walls. The people who had come before me, the ones who had disappeared into the night shift. They were here too, trapped just like me. I felt myself being pulled into the darkness again. It wasn't a physical force. It was more like my mind, my soul, being dragged into the void. I'm here now, with the others. I don't know how many of us are left. I can hear them. I can feel them all around me. The figures that were once human, now just echoes, shadows in the walls. They can never leave either. And soon someone else will come. And they'll never leave either. I'm still here. I know you've been waiting to hear what happens next. But let me warn you, this place changes you. It warps your mind, twists your thoughts, and makes you wonder if you were ever really yourself to begin with. The loop continues. I can feel it every day, every hour, every second. Time no longer has meaning in this place. Days bleed into nights, and the concept of time becomes something distant, something intangible. The building pulses with a life of its own, and the walls whisper secrets from the past. Echoes of those who've been lost to the night shift before me. The lost souls who, like me, are trapped in this nightmare. I can hear them now. Their voices, faint, but growing clearer with each passing moment. At first, I thought it was just my mind unraveling, but then I realized the building was speaking through them. The souls of the past are still here, trapped in the walls, their voices leaking through the cracks. They beg for release, but there is no escape. Not for any of us. I stand in the same hallway, the same twisted, endless corridor that stretches beyond what I can see. The fluorescent lights above buzz and flicker, but they never stay on long enough for me to make out anything clearly. Shadows dance just out of sight, teasing me with their presence. The thing that haunts this place, it is here too, watching from the corners. But it never speaks anymore. It doesn't need to. I found something new today. Another door. It had appeared out of nowhere, just like the others, but this one felt different. This door wasn't like the others I've tried to open before. It had a sense of finality to it. Called to me. It wanted me to open it. But I knew better than to trust anything in this place. Still, I couldn't resist. I reached out and turned the cold, rusted handle. It creaked open with an awful sound, the metal groaning as if protesting my decision. The air that spilled out from the room beyond was thick, acrid, and smelled of decay. My heart skipped a beat. There, in the center of the room, was a single object, a mirror. But it wasn't just any mirror. It was massive, framed in dark, weathered wood, like something out of another time. The reflection staring back at me wasn't me, not entirely. The face in the mirror was distorted, warped, like a twisted version of myself. But it wasn't just my face I saw. It was everyone else's. The figures, the lost souls of the night shift. They were all trapped in the reflection. I could see them now, their faces distorted and frozen in terror, their eyes pleading for release. They were reaching out to me, but they couldn't touch me. I was beyond their reach. For a moment, I thought I saw David's face, pale and haunted, staring at me through the glass. He looked just like I remembered him, but his eyes were wide with fear, his face frozen in time. He mouthed something, but no sound came out. "Help me?" I thought I heard him say, but it wasn't his voice. It was the voice of the building itself, the voice of the thing that had taken him. The mirror seemed to grow, to expand, pulling me into it. I couldn't tear my eyes away, no matter how hard I tried. I could feel the cold, icy fingers of the thing creeping around me, pulling me closer to the mirror. I could hear the whispers getting louder, the cries of the souls who had been here before me. "You're part of us now," they said. "You can never leave." I tried to step back, but my feet were glued to the floor. The room around me began to distort again, just like it had before. The walls warped, bending and stretching in impossible ways, and I could feel the darkness closing in. I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if I passed out or if I just disappeared into the mirror. All I know is that I'm no longer in the hallway. I'm not sure if I'm even in the same reality anymore. I'm in the mirror now with the others, trapped between worlds. Their faces are pressed against the glass, reaching out to me. They're all still here, and they're waiting for someone else to take their place. I hear a knock at the door. I don't think I'll be the last one, and I'm not sure if you can escape this place either. If you ever find yourself walking past an old, empty building late at night, don't look inside. Don't listen for the whispers. Don't knock on the door, because if you do, the night shift might just claim you too. I've come to accept the truth. There is no escape from this place. It was never meant to be an escape. The night shift isn't just a job. It isn't just a building. It's a state, a curse. An endless loop that feeds on the fear and desperation of those unfortunate enough to walk its halls. I stand now in the very center of it all, the core, the heart of the building. The mirror that had once pulled me in, the mirror that seemed to reflect the past, is now shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one a window into another world, another version of the night shift, another piece of the endless loop. The walls around me pulse with life, like the building itself is breathing, alive. The air is thick with the whispers of the lost, the souls that were claimed before me. I can feel them pressing in around me, just beyond the shadows, their cold, empty eyes staring, waiting. But I've learned something in this place. I've learned that the real horror isn't the shadows or the thing that watches us from the darkness. The true terror is the realization that there is no end to this. There is no escape. You cannot run, you cannot fight, and you cannot hide. You can only accept it. The thing that watches, the figure, the shadow, whatever it is, has been with me since the very beginning. But it's not the true enemy. It's a guide, a keeper of this place. The true horror is what waits beyond the walls of the building, beyond the mirror, beyond the broken reality we're trapped in. It is the truth that there is no other place, no other world, no escape. The night shift isn't just a job you clock into. It's a prison, a dimension of endless cycles where the clock will always strike 11 p.m. and the shadows will always grow longer. Every shift ends, but it doesn't really end. You see, I've come to understand what's truly going on here. The building, the walls, the mirror, they were never the problem. The problem was always me. The moment I walked in for that first shift, I had already sealed my fate. This place was never about who worked here or who was left behind. It was about the ones who chose to walk into it. We all make a choice when we step into the night, and we all make a choice when we decide to stay. Now I stand here with the others, trapped in this endless void, the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. We are the night shift. We are the ones who remain. And soon someone else will come. Someone else will hear the whispers. Someone else will knock on the door. And when they do, the cycle will begin again. The loop will continue. And just like me, they'll never leave. Because there is no escape from the night shift.